In the previous lecture, we learned about state and, most importantly, how we manipulate it with setState, this setState. Now, that's a feature only available in class-based components. So components you construct by using the class keyword, which extend component, which is imported from React. Now, prior to React version 16.8, this was the only way of managing state in React applications. And to say this right away, it is the way we will use throughout this course. And I'll come back to why in a second. Now, since React 16.8, there also is a way for us to manage state in functional components with a feature called React hooks. Now, I'll show you this feature here already, and actually in this course there are two complete modules on React hooks, one which teaches them from the ground up, and one that also then converts the entire course project to use React hooks. And the reasons why we need to convert that is because for this course, I'll stick to the setup, the traditional setup, where you use class-based components for managing state, even though now, since React 16.8, we could use functional components for everything. Now, why do I stick to this setup? Well, it has been the only way in the past. And if you're joining a company working on a React team, you will work with this syntax because it is the established syntax, and all projects will be written like this because it was the only way of creating components in the past. This new way we're using these React hooks is totally optional, and it's not even sure if this will be the main way of creating components in the future. And therefore, in this course, you'll simply learn both. And we'll use this established way here, which is the default way of creating components in React. And we'll use this throughout the course. And I will introduce hooks as they make sense. So here and also in a later module. And then we'll have these entire modules I already mentioned on React hooks, where you learn all about them, so that once you finish this course, you really are a React expert in whichever way you want to look at it. You will know all the different ways and their advantages of using React, making it possible for you to join any React job you want. So with that, let me show you what this React hooks feature looks like. And React hooks is really just the name of it. It's basically a collection of functions exposed to you by React, which you can use in functional components. And therefore, we'll have to convert this component here into a functional one. For that, I'll create a constant named app, and this will be a function that gets props and then has a function body. So just as we have it here in person.js. There we also created our component like that. So in here, we now no longer have state or switch name handler. So I'll cut that and temporarily add it here at the bottom so that we can later reuse that logic. We should export default app with a lowercase a because I renamed my constant to have a lowercase a. If you named it with an uppercase, of course, you don't need to change this. And then in your function body, you have no render method. You just return JSX. Basically, as you learned it for functional components. This is a normal functional component. But now you can use this React hooks feature, or one of the React hooks. Because React 16.8, and therefore you should check your package.json file whether your project does use React 16.8. If not, update the version and rerun npm install, so you do. So your React 16.8 or higher project now is able to use hooks, and you do use them by importing them from React. So instead of component, which we don't need here anymore because we're not extending it anymore, you can import use. All these hooks start with the use keyword, and you see there are a couple of hooks. State. useState is the most important React hook, and I'll introduce other hooks throughout this course, but useState is the hook that allows us to manage state in a functional component. Now, how do we use it? Well, you call it like a function, like this. And then to useState, you pass your initial state. So for that, we can copy that object we previously set up on our state property. So here, I'll pass it into useState, like that. Now, this uses this hook, but what does it actually do? useState returns an array with exactly 2 elements, and always 2 elements. That's important. So we can store this in, let's say, a state array constant. Now, the first element we get back will always be our current state. So initially that object, and whenever we change it, well, the updated state. The second element in state array will always be a function that allows us to update this state such that React is aware of it and will re-render this component, which is of course the idea and which is what also happens with this setState in class-based components. So we can also use a more modern JavaScript feature called array destructuring, which works by adding square brackets on the left side of the equal sign here. And this allows you to pull elements out of the array you get back from the right side of the equal sign, so of this function call. So in here, you can give these elements any name you want, and therefore I'll name the first one here person's state, for example. Again, that name is totally up to you. And the second element will be a function that allows you to set that state. So I'll name it setPersons. You can also name it setPersonState, whatever you want. So maybe setPersonState to be really clear what this does. So now we have these two things. Person's state gives you access to this object. So therefore, in all the places where we previously used this state, we now replace this state in all these places with person's state. Because this state doesn't exist anymore. It only exists in class-based React components, and we have no such class-based React component here anymore. It's a functional component. So this accesses the person's data. SetPersonState allows us to set a new state. And for this, we can re-add that switch name handler to our component, but how do we add a method, as this was before, to a functional component? Well, turns out you can have functions inside functions, not just in React, but in JavaScript in general. And therefore here we can add a new function stored in a constant maybe, which is my old switch name handler. I just copied that code. So now I have that switch name handler constant, which holds this function code here. And this is perfectly fine JavaScript code. You can have a function definition inside of a function. Looks strange and you typically don't use it too often, but for React hooks, you use that and it is fine. Because now you have a functional component that can manage state and that can have other functions that do something, for example, upon a click. And that's exactly what I do here. On click, we previously called this switch name handler. Well, the this keyword is now wrong because we are not inside of a class anymore. Instead, it's just switch name handler, referring to this constant here. Still without parentheses, because I don't want to execute it immediately, but only when this click occurs. And then this function will execute, and now we won't call setState anymore, because this function also doesn't exist anymore. Instead of this setState, it's now just setPersonState. And we pass our new state object into there. And with that, if you save it, with your development server still up and running, this is the app, and this looks still good, which already means that useState generally works. Otherwise, we'd not be able to extract data from our person's state down there. So if I now press switch name, watch max here, it's Maximilian. So extracting the state and updating the state and re-rendering the component upon a state change all works. There is one important difference to the state in a class-based component though. It generally looks like it works the same, but it doesn't. Let me console log person's state here so that we can see what's inside. If I save this, this app reloads. So here we have Max and not Maximilian. And this is what's in our state, right? It's an object with other state, because we're setting this as well to demonstrate that this doesn't get overridden, and persons. Now if I click switch name, we get the new state and oh, other state is missing. And that is super important. When you're using React hooks, your function here, which you get as the second element in that array, does not merge whatever you pass to it with the old state. Instead, it replaces the old state with it. And this is super important because this means that whenever you're updating the state like this, you have to manually make sure you include all old state data. Here, for example, by manually adding the other state property, and then you have to access the person's state here and access other state. And this will just make sure that we copy in the old, in this case, untouched other state. Of course, you could change it here as well. And when you're doing that, now if I click switch name, other state is still there. Now, this is one way of doing it, But the more elegant way is actually to not manually merge your states, but instead use useState multiple times. Whereas in class-based components, you only have one state property, and this set state automatically merges changes with the old state to not discard any state. Here, you can have multiple useState calls. So we can call useState again, and there, if we wanted to manage our other state, we could pass in our other state, some other value object here, or if all we want to manage is a string, we could also just pass in that string as a default value. It doesn't have to be an object. It could be an object, as it is here. It could also just be a string, a number, an array, a boolean, whatever your app needs. And you can have as many useState calls as you want. And therefore now if I log my person state, and then here I also extract that into two variables with the help of array destructuring. That could be my other state and set other state. So now if I log person's state and other state, and I'm never using set other state because I don't want to set it anywhere. Now if I log both here with two useState calls, back in the app you see initially we got our person's state, which still has its own other state, so let's remove that. So again, reload. So now we have the person's state, which is just this object, and then we have our some other state here, some other value. And if I switch name, we updated persons, and we still have some other value because that state is not touched by our call to set person's state, which only interacts with that first useState result. So multiple useStates with different state slices, so to say. That is how you manage state in a functional component with React hooks. You don't have one big state object, though you could, and you could manually merge it if you prefer that, but instead you have multiple separated state slices. This is the useState hook, and this is a glimpse at React hooks in general, and this is the most important React hook. To summarize it, React hooks is all about these use something functions, with useState being the most important, that allow you to add functionality to functional components. Like here, useState allows us to add state management to functional components. So if you are using React hooks only, and again, I will teach you all these important hooks throughout this course, you don't need to use class-based components. Still, as I mentioned, in this course, I will use class-based components because that is the established way. This is the way you will need it in any job you're starting. And therefore, if you want to become a React developer, you absolutely have to know that name. Still, you'll also learn this React hook syntax along the way. And to mention it again, there are 2 complete modules toward the end of this course where I, in one module, walk through all the important React hooks so that you have them all in one place. And in the other module, I'll take that React project, this complete course project we'll eventually build in this course, and convert this to use React hooks only, so that you are well prepared for whichever project you are diving into. So this was a nice excursion here. Attached, you find a rollback to the class-based approach, and you also find this code here, so that you have this for reference, but take that rollback, that class-based approach to continue, because that is the approach with which we'll continue throughout this course and which we'll use throughout this course.